IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Aditya, Pareek. Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that you can take our special credit courses in ethical reasoning in public policy. To know more, check out the link in the description. Coming to today's episode, the latest ripple in the hotbed of activity that is the Indo-Pacific is the AUKUS trilateral framework involving the US, the UK, and Australia. It is officially termed a security partnership with a focus on the transfer and sharing of strategically important high-tech military platforms, including but not limited to nuclear-propelled submarines and Tomahawk cruise missiles. With a host of geopolitical implications, AUKUS may also emerge as a way to consolidate the West's what they perceive as deterrence against China in the Indo-Pacific. However, as an adverse effect inside the West's own camp, AUKUS has also denied France a huge submarine contract from Australia, and the resultant reaction from France has been fiery. To discuss the various geopolitical and IR aspects of AUKUS, I have with me today my colleague Arjun Gargeyas and Dr. Andrey Gubin from Russia's Far Eastern Federal University. Welcome, Arjun. Welcome, Dr. Gubin.
Nice to be here.
Hello.
I'd also like to mention to our listeners that they should check out two opinion pieces in Asia Times about AUKUS, one by me and Dr. Gubin and another by Arjun. We'll link them in the description. So to start with, the declaration of the AUKUS alliance caused a huge uproar from France, which felt it was being excluded in the Indo-Pacific. Will France's initial actions cause further friction between France and the UK and perhaps NATO?
Well, it's a question with a deep historical roots, I think, that we can remember also the year of 1966. Then France, on the initiative of its president, famous Franz de Gaulle, actually withdrew from the NATO military structure and remained only in political structure. The Gaulle reason was that France actually the France sovereignty actually was suffering from NATO, from the United States, from UK, and from all the domestic struggle of NATO. Paris actually made such a decision, and only in 2009, Paris canceled this kind of decision and returned to NATO military structure. And even today, some people from France actually think that that was a huge mistake to return to NATO military structure, because it's even today, it's also do harm to France's sovereignty. You know that within the NATO, there are a lot of different tensions. We have tensions between France and Great Britain and between France and Germany. Also, we can remember that 2 years ago, Emmanuel Macron actually claimed about the death of the brain of NATO. Such, very sound claim. Actually, we can see that this kind of wording means that Paris is not satisfied to be a bellboy for the United States and for the Great Britain. So we can see some kind of unsatisfaction of French leadership by its role within the NATO. I think that I should remind these kind of historical parallels. Thank you.
Arjun, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so I just read that France had a very, very strong opinion about the AUKUS, especially because it was related to the nuclear submarine deal. And the fact that yesterday, even the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, called up Emmanuel Macron and spoke about how India and France can actually collaborate together in the Indo-Pacific. So it's basically France feels that they have been excluded from whatever is going on in the region. And the fact that Australia, which had signed the deal with France, has now backed out and is going with the US and UK. So France just wants to be a part of the Indo-Pacific, but now that with the Quad and AUKUS, they feel kind of excluded, and they feel that their presence in the region is not something that people are taking seriously. So that's why they want to be here, but they're not able to. And so they're trying to stitch up other alliances, maybe with India, maybe with Japan now. So to see how they can actually maintain their presence in the region.
Interesting. So if I may add a few points to that, so I think NATO is a pretty outdated concept. And the reason for that is the circumstances in which it was conceived and which no longer exist. There is no Warsaw Pact, there is no Soviet Union with influence over Eastern Europe. So it makes very little sense for it to exist in the first place. And, the contemporary alliances around the Atlantic and the Pacific, you have some states, some nations, some blocs which are looking to optimize their policy and consequences from these policies. So, for example, you have the EU, Germany and France. They're ready to collaborate with partners on constabulary missions like anti-piracy or benign missions like HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. But when you introduce the strategic dimension of great power politics, policymakers think twice before committing to it. I think there have been some instances where the EU has contemplated keeping its security, geopolitical and economic interests separate. This pragmatically means that they want to take advantage of US security and nuclear umbrella, but they'd rather have preferential trade agreements with China and Russia, which are adversaries to the US in their world. So if I recall a bit in the Cold War, you have the Falklands War fiasco, where France apparently helped both belligerents, both sides. But in helping the UK so closely, a precedent was set that if a customer of France's military equipment has conflicting interests with France, it may not be able to rely on France. And if the French interests are conflated with the other side, France may support them. Then there's the case with the 2016 Scorpion leaks, where apparently detailed specs of the submarine design of the Scorpion class got leaked, which may have potentially jeopardized the submarines of the same make that many countries in the Indo-Pacific are operating and building based on designs by the French company Naval Group. Okay, moving on to another question. So this announcement of AUKUS comes on the back of the first ever in-person Quad summit. Though Australia has mentioned that India and Japan had been kept in the loop. But will this new trilateral alliance dilute the Quad's effectiveness and its working? We'll start with you, Dr. Gubin.
Well, I think that the future of the Quad is not so evident. As for nowadays, Quad is like a jellyfish, unstable and going with sea flows, this and that. Evidently, the alliance, the Indo-Pacific concept and the Quad as a non-formal alliance is strictly anti-Chinese. But we can see that Australia even made a decision to deepen military cooperation with the United States. Australia actually cannot name the China to be a real foe, to be a rival. As for Japan, the another angle of a Quad, the another member, Tokyo also refrains from very rigid, very dangerous claims. But recently, Japanese politicians and military made some in their speeches and in documents, they made some hints, and they actually said that Japan was ready to defend Taiwan Island if needed. And also, Japanese military Southern forces, they actually deployed anti-ship and air defense missiles in Miyako Strait near Okinawa to the disputed areas with China. And the modernization of self-defense forces and all of these upheavals are very negatively assessed in Beijing. Beijing actually is very nervous with all the Japanese military steps and with all of this kind of upheaval, including deepening of Japan-US defense cooperation. As for India, well, there is no sign that India will oppose China directly, even having some border issues, even having some serious historical legacy and some tensions. But I wonder, do we have any country without any heavy historical legacy with China? I think not. Some bordering countries with China. Well, but nevertheless, India tries to be rather neutral to China. But Washington is interested in, more persistency. So probably the United States and the Biden administration or future administration can offer to Indian leadership something interesting, some carrot, to be more persistent, to be more pro-American. That's some sense of American strategy to India and to Quad itself.
Interesting. Although that is not the kind of media landscape in India where we're seeing that India is in fact neutral to China, and it's the US which is pushing India in a very anti-China direction. I think the Chinese do that themselves pretty well. So coming to you, Arjun, what are your thoughts?
Hey, yeah. So I'll focus on India and I'll leave the Japan part to you. So basically, yesterday, India and its official spokesperson of the External Affairs Ministry, I think the Foreign Secretary, went on record and said that the Quad and AUKUS remain separate. And this is the very interesting part. And he mentioned that how AUKUS serves as a security alliance and the Quad is not. So when the Quad was first reconvened, I guess last year, everyone expected it to be a military alliance against the Chinese aggressiveness in the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific. But the Quad has grown much bigger now. I mean, the areas of collaboration have been drastically widened and broadened. So I guess military and defense is not the only place for collaboration between the Quad countries, and so they want to focus more on other stuff like climate change or technology cooperation or anything else which is apart from the defense part of it. So I guess once the Quad summit is held this week, we will get a definitive idea on what the Quad wants to take forward with its in its agenda. I am guessing that they're going to kind of keep the defense part of it out because again with AUKUS, just before the Quad summit is held, the Australian Prime Minister and the US President is going to formally sign a deal for the nuclear submarines. So that is definitely going to overshadow the summit. And I guess that's why they want to steer away from defense and defensive capabilities and military alliance as the main focal point for the Quad summit, and gradually, bring in other areas of collaboration and focus on that for the first summit. So hopefully, what we're going to see is that India and Japan are going to come out of the summit fairly satisfied with what they get, and and see that AUKUS is not going to be, like a roadblock for whatever the Quad actually set out to achieve. So if that is going to happen, I think that the question of the dilution of the Quad is going to not be of any importance. But in case if that does not happen, then we have to see where it goes.
So, for my part, I think India and Japan have taken note of the musical chairs as precedent in the region's balancing and counterbalancing happening just about overnight. So, Japan, from what I understand, is more ready to step up the military and tech collaboration directly than India. I would put my money on Japanese troops and assets actually supporting US and other Western forces in any hostilities that may hypothetically break out in the region. So India, I'm not so sure, would like to shed blood over things that may not be existential threats to it. And for the strategic tech and high-tech sectors specifically, like semiconductors, etc., I think India and rare earth elements as well, India would benefit a lot from the Quad, but let's see how our industry develops in collaboration with the Quad. So I wouldn't really, know much about it. On that note, folks, we'll take a small break. Don't go anywhere.
Intel vPro provides the complete manageability tools to detect, repair, and protect your devices remotely, so your workforce can keep doing what they do best, wherever they're working from. Today, as most employees and IT teams no longer work under the same roof, fixing glitchy PCs and proactively managing the PC fleet has become increasingly difficult. The Intel vPro platform addresses these problems with its Intel Active Management technology, Intel AMT. vPro enables IT to keep mission-critical resources running by establishing a secure connection between IT and an Intel vPro platform-based PC. In the event of a cyber attack, Intel AMT lets IT remotely manage and repair systems simultaneously, even if they are dispersed across multiple locations. PCs can be recovered quickly wherever they may be. Plus, the Intel Endpoint Management Assistant, Intel EMA, enables cloud-based manageability using simple web-based tools to connect with and remediate any Intel vPro platform-based PC. Both these tools provide better manageability and faster response times, resulting in substantial device management support costs, saving, and fewer help desk tickets. Visit intel.in/IT heroes to know more. Intel vPro, built for business.
Welcome back, folks. We're discussing AUKUS. Moving on, so let's talk about China. So China will be wary about further nuclear escalation in the region, though Australia will take a while to get operational nuclear submarines. The strategic impact can be seen right away, but the actual submarines would come later, much later probably. Will China change its own nuclear posturing, or worse, supply and help its allies like Pakistan acquire their own nuclear submarines as a counterbalancing measure? What do you think, Dr. Gubin?
Well, that's very interesting and simultaneously anxious prospect. I think that there is still a very long time, 15 years or so, for Australia to obtain real operational Virginia-class attack submarine or whatever nuclear-powered submarine. It can be Astute or Virginia or something else. Who knows? But I think that Virginia is the most probable alternative. But it's not less than 12 or 15 years for first house to be ready operationally. But today I just met some ideas of American experts that actually confirmed some of my ideas, that the United States, before this kind of attack submarine program completion, can lease several Los Angeles nuclear attack submarine, which are going to be decommissioned. And there are still more than 25 submarines operationally ready in the US Navy, and probably a dozen are in Pearl Harbor or so. In San Diego, there are also something. And the United States can lease 2-3 Los Angeles submarines just in a few years, not in 15 years, but in 2 or 3 years or 5 years. So it's pretty soon. And that is not very pleasant probably for China. But I think that is the most critical here is not submarines themselves, but Canberra political and military intention to use its military capacity to control sea lanes, to deter China militarily, and to implement this kind of area denial strategy. In South China Sea, in the eastern part of Indian Ocean, up to Malacca Strait and wherever. As for today, I very doubt that Canberra is really ready to deter China openly and transparently and directly. As for Pakistan and as for some Chinese, actions. As for Pakistan, there's a pretty challenging task for Pakistan to build a nuclear-powered submarine itself, strategic or some attack submarine, no matter. It's very challenging. As for chance that China can transfer some technology or ready submarine, I also doubt that China can transfer a nuclear-powered submarine. They can transfer some 2 or 3 diesel-powered or this kind of AIP, also propulsion, like Yuan-class submarines, that they offered Chinese. They offered to Thailand several submarines to be built. And I think that is a real prospect that China can offer several diesel-powered submarines to Pakistan as well. As Pakistan Navy for today has pretty obsolete French design submarines and some midgets as well. But I think that the rise of China, the military rise of China, and this kind of rocketing in military technology, in obtaining sophisticated, up-to-date, and stealthy, and very capable weapon is imminent, and we cannot stop this kind of leverage of China. So will Australia have 2 Los Angeles class submarines in 2 years, and we would have a dozen of Virginia submarines in 20 years? It doesn't matter for China, actually. China does not care, because China goes global. That was a very good book by Martin Jacques 10 years ago. So China goes global, and also that was that was named Then the China Rules the World, and another book of David Shambaugh, China Goes Global. And I think that that's true. So China goes global. So it's as for regional players, they actually doesn't. So that's my opinion. Not very optimistic, actually. I think.
Interesting, and thank you for those book recommendations. I think our listeners would benefit from that. And Arjun, what do you think?
Yeah, so I feel that the region is going to be very densely, populated with nuclear weapons. We already have nuclear states like India, China, Pakistan, and others also. So just a few days before AUKUS was announced, there were reports that South Korea tested its own ballistic missile, and North Korea also fired some missiles and tested them. So what's interesting is going to be the fact that how will everyone in the region cope with the threat of nuclear escalation right here. So now we know that the US is open to sharing critical technologies, especially with sharing the nuclear technology with Australia. So what seems to be the question is, will it also be open to sharing it with other nations, like maybe South Korea? Will it actually help develop some sort of nuclear submarines for South Korea, and just for a deterrence mechanism against the North Koreans? Or will it actually help Japan or India? So the question still remains if the US is going to go all out in its Indo-Pacific approach, and especially in the nuclear field, and kind of make this the region like a hotbed of nuclear weapons. So in that case, I guess China would respond in a more aggressive way. But yes, as Dr. Gubin said, for now, China should not have much to worry about. They know that the nuclear submarines which Australia are going to get is still far away, and but they also know that once they get it, their hold of the region would kind of reduce. What paths or what policies will they take in order to prevent that from happening? We still have to see. But for now, I guess China would not feel threatened by the AUKUS pact, though they come out openly and dismiss any pact which is kind of excluding them. They did that with Quad and said that it was doomed to fail. I'm pretty sure they're going to do that with AUKUS too. But they know that this is just a long term thing, and they would feel pretty safe for now. But in case the US decides to share these critical technologies with other players in the region, other nuclear states also, so that time there might be some escalation, and that might lead to disastrous consequences.
Interesting. And let me say that I agree with both of you, but just to add a bit, so nuclear submarines, in my opinion, for Pakistan wouldn't be in the picture, because the way China treats Pakistan is they give them capabilities to counter the target adversary, which unfortunately in this case is India, but not so much that Pakistan can potentially jeopardize China's own interests, if or rather when their interests diverge from their patron superpower China. So if conventional submarines are able to tie down India's military resources, they're quite happy to provide them to the Pakistanis. But nuclear submarines would just make them too independent. Then you also have to potentially think of future decommissioning issues and nuclear safety issues, which take a lot of wherewithal, believe me. As Soviet Union and the US both had a lot of mishaps in this department, I'm not sure China sees the Pakistanis as competent enough, responsible enough for avoiding similar disasters. So for our final question, India has traditionally depended on Russia for its defense requirements. Will AUKUS drive India further away from the West for military capabilities and towards Russia? Or will the West embrace India and share nuclear submarine technology with a regional power like India or, say, South Korea too? What do you think, Dr. Gubin?
Very interesting question, and I'm to make it even more interesting in answer, because that the United States actually is not very interested, is not very profound to the Russian-India defense cooperation. Americans are not very happy of all the Indian contracts with Russia, including, the recent information of the Prometei air defense system and some missiles and fighter jets cooperation. But crucial question is what Washington itself can offer to India in exchange to stop or to impede some collaborative initiatives with Russia. I mean, for India. And there is no strict answer. There is no transparent answer. And it seems that American leadership more tend to engage India and to make New Delhi more anti-Chinese. Even Chinese make it better. I know that our Chinese colleagues can be very hard partners in negotiations. But the United States, they're trying to make India more anti-Chinese, and vice versa. For Americans, it's very profitable to distract Beijing resources to the opposition with India, to distract from opposition to the United States and its allies in the Pacific. So from both ends, it's profitable to the United States, this kind of activity. But I would repeat, it's very crucial question what Washington is ready to propose to Indian leadership. Some technologies, some financial aid, some technological aid, some nuclear deal, like, we all know this kind of low enriched and high enriched uranium deal. So what would be this kind of proposal? As for transferring some threshold, some decisive and sophisticated military technologies from American side, so it's very unlikely, because, you know, the answer is the close India-Russian defense ties. And I think that in Washington there are some scares, there are some fears that India can share some ideas, some technologies with Russian partners, or some, you know, Russian specialists, they can scrutinize some American technologies being in India under some collaborative initiatives. So I very doubt that the United States can offer some, you know, F-35 fighters or some other sophisticated weapons to India. Well, as for you just mentioned, you know, South Korea, and it's very interesting example, very vivid, because, you know, as for the Republic of Korea, they are rather skilled guys to build good ships and good submarines. They are very bold for experiments. As for today, they are trying to fit their national design submarines with short-range ballistic missiles, with medium-range cruise missiles for experiments to rise up their military capacity. I track this kind of activity very thoroughly. It's very interesting. And actually, Koreans can nationally build nuclear-powered submarine. I think that that is not a huge problem for Koreans. And I've seen a couple of years ago in some defense program and shipbuilding projects, I've seen in plans that up to 2030, we would like to have the first national design nuclear-powered attack submarine and aircraft carrier also. So, you know, they are coming in pairs. I mean, nuclear submarine, aircraft carriers. Everybody wants a good aircraft carrier for their navy. Well, but as for leasing American and for South Koreans, they won't lease some American nuclear-powered submarine. That's not a very good option. We should recall their experience of THAAD deployment in South Korea and the further reaction of Chinese leadership, which imposed economic sanctions on South Korean companies, and some business and trade and investment activity actually were nearly stopped with China, and that was very unpleasant for Korean leadership, and especially in under the face of economic crisis. So I very doubt that today Koreans would lease something threshold from the United States, but they can do authentically design very interesting and sophisticated weapon. Also, we should remember that the next day, South Koreans obtain nuclear-powered submarine. The next day, Japan will obtain nuclear-powered submarine. That's not, a huge problem for them as well. But this kind of proliferation, even non-prohibited, to have a nuclear-powered submarine is not prohibited for NPT members. So you can, there is no problem. But actually, nobody had before. Probably Australia will be the pioneer, will be the first example. As for India, that's another story because India is not an NPT member. But South Koreans and Japanese probably are next candidates to obtain nuclear-powered submarines. And that's a game changer, actually. They also will obtain a stronger capacity in deterrence, in controlling sea lanes, in area denial, potency. And that is not very unpleasant for China as well, and for Russia as well. It's very good question for Russia here in Pacific. Will Australian, Korean, Japanese nuclear submarines be a problem for Russian Navy or not? What can we gain and what can they suffer from this kind of situation? And as for today, I don't have the precise answer for this question, but we should think it over.
What do you think, Arjun?
Yes, I kind of completely agree with Dr. Gubin, but I have just a couple of points to make. It's just that he said if the US will offer anything in return to India to keep it from pursuing its military ties with Russia. But I am very skeptical about that happening. Maybe in the Trump era, due to their personal and highly defense related cooperation, we could have seen that happening. But I don't know if the Biden administration would actually go to an extent of pursuing India to and deterring India to kind of prevent it from pursuing the defense cooperation it already has with Russia. So India has always enjoyed like a historical tie with Russia, and defense and military cooperation was among like the highest of the highest in their relationship, and it still continues to be so. And recently, there was an Indian army contingent which landed in Russia as part of a military exercise of all the SEO nations. That happened, and India and Russia seem to be on the same page regarding Afghanistan. I maybe both of them have different interests, but at least they project to be on the same page for now. So I guess AUKUS for now is going to uh, keep India with Russia, and potentially maybe down the future, if when the Americans decide to get into technology sharing with the rest of the region, maybe India is going to take a call then. But again, India has and will depend on Russia for its military technology and its defense capabilities. For it has been for a long time, and it will continue to be so, at least for now.
Interesting. And just to add a bit, my main recommendation in the piece that me and Dr. Gubin wrote. So I recommended that the US should offer India one of its Seawolf class fast attack nuclear submarines. And this would be much more persuasive for India compared to the punitive approach with CAATSA sanctions that the US is currently mulling for India buying the S-400 air defense system from Russia. But truth be told, deep down, I'm not so sure that the US will ever follow through on this expectation of mine. Because I don't think the US is ready for that kind of commitment to India. The Russians have been, very generous in extending cooperation that I would never dream of the US extending to us. So for the time being, at least on defense ties, I don't think the India-Russia equation is going to change very much. There might be some regressions, but I don't think largely it would change. But, for my final thought, I would like to share something very personal. I think people like me who see potential for India-Russia cooperation as very important for India's own interests are fighting an uphill battle where India's security establishment and polity are inching closer and closer to the US and the West, and the space for cooperation is shrinking in their minds. So, the inspiration behind why I still choose to take up the cause of Russia-India cooperation is actually an American admiral, believe it or not, Hyman Rickover, the father of the modern naval nuclear propulsion in the West, at least. If you read his biography, the man changed the entire culture and direction of the US Navy alone, armed with nothing but convincing arguments and data. Would you folks like to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Pareek, for this kind of Arjun, for this kind of very delightful discussion. I think that can be useful for our friends as well. I also do hope very much that Russia and India defense cooperation and overall cooperation won't suffer from this kind of upheaval. I mean, AUKUS and some other Indo-Pacific American strategy leverages, because we share something precious than just defense. We share common interests and common idea of Eurasia, the common idea, and the habit of cooperation as well from the Soviet legacy. And that kind of idea you just offered to our American colleagues to offer this kind of Seawolf class fast attack submarine to Indian Navy. For me, it's not very good. But I think for Russian specialists, it can be very interesting to have access to Sevolv-class submarine. Nevertheless, the American Navy has only 2 these kind of submarines because they are very, expensive and very, huge and not very maneuverous as further more cheaper Virginia-class submarine. So that's why they have only 2. But nevertheless, I think for a Russian specialist, it can be a very interesting experience to see Sevolv in Indian Navy and to meet it in the sea. But as for future contracts, I think that it's better to offer our Indian partners Akula or probably some collaborative project for India national design with Russian assistance nuclear submarine, like we just did in missile technology and space technology as well.
So on that note, folks, we'll call it a wrap. If you liked today's discussion, then do check out all past and future episodes of All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Habit Coach, mythologist and author Devdutt Patnaik joins Ashton to talk about his latest book, How to Become Rich, 12 Lessons I Learned from Vedic and Puranic Stories. Check out how we can approach money and apply Vedic practices into our daily life. In the last episode of the season for Last Man Standing is the Battle of the Two Wheelers, Bajaj Auto versus Hero Honda with Anupam and Ambi. On Misconduct, Ragvi and Nisha tell us the chilling story of Shabnam and her lover Salim, who together killed 6 members of her family. On Yuddha, Aditya and Anirudh explore Sher Shah's journey of becoming the most powerful man in Hindustan. And on Marathi Kirkitun, Dr. Rajiv and Manik discuss author Vinda Karandikar's short essays and poetry. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. It really does help us. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quota, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intel vPro. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.